Okay, so the Bleach No Breaths from Hell one-shot was released in August of 2021, and with the return of the Bleach anime in the form of the 1,000-Year Blood War, now brings the question, when will we see the manga continued? Before we get into the return of the Bleach manga and the start of the Hell arc, do me a huge favor and drop a sub if you guys like more videos like this, as well as joining our Discord server for more community debates and talks. Okay, so before I talk about exactly when the Hell arc is going to start, I want to go over the events that actually occurred in the one-shot so we can know exactly what we should be expecting going into the Hell arc. Now, the chapter opens up with the narrator talking in first person past tense about when he was younger, right? He goes on to state that he had 2 goldfish. They were very cute and the larger one ended up dying. The remaining goldfish felt very lonely and begun to grow larger and became healthier, and in the end he was glad that the larger one died. Now, at first glance, this may seem like a random opening to a new arc, but I mean, trust me, there's way more symbolism going on here, but I'm going to come back to this once we're all on the same page at the end of the one-shot. Now, the main events of the chapter actually start off with Kazui, Ichigo, and Orihime's son pretending to be asleep, and then he soon sneaks out of his room when Orihime isn't looking, and Kon ends up calling him out on a promise that he made to Orihime to go to sleep, in which he replies that he made a promise first, and that promise is more important because he made it first. He then jumps out of the window, and he manifests Shinigami clothes, and is caught by a flying fish that he seemingly manifested. But before we go on, I want to point something out here. So first of all, he's able to actually turn into a Shinigami or a Soul Reaper, because he whips out the Soul Reaper clothes out of nowhere, without the use of Soul Candy, and without the use of the Soul Reaper badge. Now, he also told Ichika, I believe that's her name, Renji and Rukia's daughter, that he was a Soul Reaper at the end of the last chapter, but the way that the chapter was portrayed, it didn't seem like anyone really knew, besides Kon, that he was actually a Soul Reaper here. So my prediction is that he's not necessarily a Soul Reaper per se, but he's using some sort of Fullbring, similar to Ichigo's original Fullbring in the Fullbring arc. Just the way he manifests the clothes out of nothing in these wave-like patterns almost seems to prove that. I mean, it is definitely very reminiscent of what Ichigo has already done. I mean, the Fullbringers have all sorts of possibilities with, like, Ginjo manifesting his own sword. I mean, you can see that Kazui also has his own sword there in the back. And also another thing I wanted to point out is that he ends up jumping onto a flying fish that, if you look at it, looks nearly identical to the one that we saw in the beginning. I mean, this implies a couple of things here if you know where I'm going with this. I propose that the narrator here is actually Kazui, because he's here talking about fish and he's got the same fish manifestations going on. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because the narrator refers to them as cute, which shows that he was likely like a little kid during the time of the events, in which if Kazui is the narrator and did have some goldfish die, I'd assume that maybe out of respect or something, he'd have his own little fish summons with whichever abilities he actually possesses. Anyways, it turns out that the promise that Kazui made was to a crying, lonely spirit. You know, it kind of reminds me of the dynamic that Ichigo had in the beginning of Bleach. He tells them that he's going to take him to a place where he won't be lonely anymore. He's kind of crying, he's all sad because he's lonely. So they walk up to a shrine, right? I'd like to pause here again for another second, as it doesn't really make sense to me as how Kazui actually knows about any of this stuff. How does he know where to bring the spirit? How does he know what to do? How did he become a Soul Reaper? How are other people not seemingly involved? I mean, he's just a little kid, but he must have been told by somebody, presumably Ichigo, but I don't know until what point Ichigo actually contributed to this. Anyways, at the shrine, Kazui does something very strange, does some very strange clapping, manifests some other floating things, little floating eyeball things, and a portal opens up with a very dark interior. He tells him that he won't be alone in there, and then we jump to 3 hours prior, right? We see Ikkaku training Ichika, and some funny exchanges between the two of them. We see that she tells Ikkaku that he improved, but that kind of pisses him off because he says he's always been good, sensei or whatever. Jump cut to Renji talking to Ichigo over a soul phone about something known as the Soul Funeral Festival. This kind of leads us into our major events here. This is going to be kind of the little alley-oop into the beginning of this next arc. I'll explain why in a bit. But first of all, this is Renji's first time hearing about this as well, his first year. But he explains to Ichigo that it was told to him that this is a ritual that happens for deceased captains 12 years after they die. And since they don't die very often, this ritual per se is not performed very often, this little soul funeral festival. Now they had to do it for Captain Yamamoto, Captain Unohana, and now Ukitake. For this ritual, you essentially need to capture a hollow in the world of the living and kill it in front of their grave. And he also invites Ichigo to come as well. Only the lieutenants are actually allowed to be in the world of the living and capture this hollow, and the captains remain in the Soul Society. That brings us to Mayuri Kodotsuchi, who actually ends up using some of his brand new technology. That there's a little bit of an emphasis in this chapter as well, that there's a lot of new soul technology. Anyways, he manages to tell all the lieutenants to go to the world of the living, and I love that we actually get introduced to some of the new characters, some new lieutenants such as Yayahara Yuyu, I believe that's her name, and we can see how the world of the living is kind of influencing the Soul Society Society with their new technology. They have new Soul TVs and whatnot. And they're all kind of just standing there waiting for hollows. And in the meantime, Ichika managed to sneak into the world of the living to kind of get a glimpse of what's actually happening. But she notices a hollow standing behind Ichigo and Renji that they somehow managed to not catch. It's a very weird looking hollow. And then, you know, she points it out to him, and all of a sudden the hollow sends Renji flying. And then out of nowhere, all of these chained hollows begin appearing. They look kind of similar to regular hollows, but they have this chained appearance. So they're taken care of pretty easily. We get to see a lot of the lieutenants kind of show off their new moves. And then we see a very familiar face greet Renji. It was actually the 8th Espada. Now, he looks a little bit different now, and he talks about how he has fallen in hell and how he enjoys it. He also mentioned that the hollow hole is now on the outside of their body, almost as like a halo type thing. He attacks Renji and Ichigo, and his appearance changes a little. He grows some horns, and then we jump over to the Soul Society, where Shunsui is starting to put the pieces together. Now, the captains are gathered in front of Ukitake's grave, and they suddenly notice some like black liquid stuff appearing out of nowhere, and Shunsui immediately points out, you know, this is Will-O-Wisp from hell. Note that previously in chapter 12 of Bleach, only in chapter 12, this is like the only time we've ever seen it besides the Hellverse, we discovered that hell is actually a real place in the world of Bleach. It's outside of Hueco Mundo. Hueco Mundo is not actually the representation of hell. That's more like a purgatory type thing, where hollows are sent who, you know, committed severe crimes as humans. Shunsui goes on to state that there's a word called Rei. It's a measure of spirit energy, and the average Soul Reaper, you know, has grade 20 Rei. A lieutenant has about grade 4, and a captain's typically have grade 3 or higher. So now, since Soul Reapers' bodies are made out of Reishi, it returns to the earth in the Soul Society when they die, but the captains have too high of a concentration in which the Soul Funeral Festival must take place in order to actually allow them to return. But there's a superstition going on that Shunsui has known for a while now that is seemingly proven true when this Will-O-Wisp appears, and that's that the captains cannot actually return, and that the ritual that they're doing is actually sending their comrades to hell. It's condemning them to hell, and that's proven true by the 8th Espada. He reiterates this. So think about it. Captain Yamamoto, Captain Unohana, Ukitake, as well as all of the previous Gotei 13 that we've not actually gotten to see yet, as well as the current Warden of Hell, which is pointed out by the 8th Espada, are all there. Then all of a sudden we see Ukitake's sword pierce the 8th Espada from the middle of the portal and drag him back into hell, in which he leaves us one clue about what's going on. His little clue is, you know, about the hell butterflies and how they actually got their name. Now, something to keep in mind here is that when Kazui actually opens up his portal for the Lonely Spirit, he opened up a portal that looked almost exactly like the one that the hell butterflies came out of, which brings about a ton of questions, like how does he actually have access to this? How does he know? It's a little worrisome here. I don't know exactly where they're going to be taking this, but I'm very curious. Also, back to the symbolism in the beginning, I think that the larger fish was actually very symbolic of hell itself, in which the smaller fish began to thrive after it was gone, or not too much of an issue. It also could be in relation to the Quincy's and the Soul Reapers. You know, the Quincy's kind of disappeared and the Soul Reapers began to thrive afterwards, because if you think about it, the Quincy's were kind of ruining the balance because they were just destroying hollows, whereas the Soul Reapers were like purifying them, cleansing them, bringing them back to the Soul Society. I think that's a little bit less likely, but I mean, it's also possible as we're just, you know, finishing up with the Quincy's and the Quincy King. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think below about this. Anyways, back to when we should expect the manga to return. I'd assume that later, once the 1,000-Year Blood War is approaching the end of its animation, I believe it is around the spring of 2024. I think that's when we should start seeing it return it. If not even sooner, so the manga will have some material when the animation is over. I mean, in an interview with Viz about the 1,000-Year Blood War, Kubo actually mentions that he typically starts a new arc not too long after the end of the previous one. I mean, at least that's how he started off the 1,000-Year Blood War, so it's likely something like this will happen again. And obviously the one shot was created as a tease to start the new arc. Personally, this one might actually end up being one of my favorites, as we're going to be able to most likely see previous members of the Gotei 13 and other fights we never got to see. This is something that Kubo also mentioned in this interview, is that he wants to focus moving forward on fights that didn't quite make it into the manga, but fights that he still would have liked to make. So I'll make another video talking about the fights that we should actually expect to see in this Hell arc, because there's some fights that I'm 99% certain will happen. I'm very excited to share them with you guys, but that's deserving of its own video. Anyways, if you guys like more videos like this, do me a huge favor, drop a sub as well as commenting what you expect to see in this new arc. Join our Discord server. We're going to be talking about this a little bit more in depth down there, and if you want to talk to me directly as well, you can do that. Cop our hoodie, and I'll catch you in the next one.